90-year-old gardener fed the whole neighborhood. Then the city tried to take everything. Every morning before sunrise, a 90-year-old man worked in silence, planting, harvesting, and leaving bags of fresh food on strangers' doorsteps. No name, no praise, just quiet kindness. But when the city called it an abandoned lot and moved to demolish it, one woman decided that wasn't how his story would end. At 90 years old, Harold Otis knelt beside his tomato plants, his hands slow but sure. Every morning, he came to this half-acre lot in Riverside, once forgotten by the city, now transformed by his quiet dedication. What began as an abandoned patch had become a thriving garden. Rows of vegetables, a small chicken coop, and the steady rhythm of care. For over 15 years, this was his calling, not for praise, but because growing food and giving it away was his way of serving long after he'd hung up his uniform. 3 blocks away, Carla Martins juggled her bags, her daughter Sophia's backpack, and a cold cup of coffee as they rushed to the bus stop. At 32, Carla was stretched thin, single mom, office worker, night student. Sophia was the one who spotted the brown paper bag on their doorstep. "Mom, what's this?" Inside, vibrant tomatoes, crisp lettuce, and 3 brown eggs. No note, no explanation. "Maybe it's from the grocery store," Sophia suggested, but Carla shook her head. These weren't store-bought vegetables. They had the imperfect, earthy beauty of something grown with care, with soil still clinging to their roots. For the next week, the bags appeared every few days, always filled with seasonal produce that tasted better than any vegetables Sophia had ever had. Carla asked neighbors if they had seen anything unusual, but no one had noticed anything out of the ordinary. The mystery deepened, and with it, her curiosity. Unable to concentrate on her work, Carla decided to leave early. She picked up Sophia from school and, instead of heading home, drove slowly through the neighborhood with her windows down, looking for clues. "What are we looking for, Mom?" Sophia asked, her face pressed against the passenger window. "I'm not sure, sweetie. Maybe a garden, someone who grows vegetables." They turned onto Maple Street, and Sophia suddenly sat up straight. "Mom, look, there's a chicken." Carla followed her daughter's pointing finger and saw a small white hen pecking at the ground, near a chain-link fence. Beyond the fence stretched the most incredible garden either of them had ever seen. Rows upon rows of vegetables, fruit trees heavy with produce, and flowers that added splashes of color throughout the green landscape. And there, bent over a patch of beans, was an elderly man in worn overalls and a faded baseball cap. His movements were slow but sure, and even from a distance, Carla could see the love and attention he put into every plant he touched. "That's him," she whispered, though Sophia didn't understand what she meant. The next morning, Carla woke before her alarm and dressed quietly, leaving a note for Sophia with their neighbor, who often watched her before school. She drove to the garden lot and parked across the street, feeling foolish but determined to solve the mystery that had been brightening their days. Mr. Otis was already there. She watched as he moved through the garden with the efficiency of long practice, harvesting vegetables and placing them carefully in a wheelbarrow. When he finished, he loaded several bags from the wheelbarrow and began walking through the neighborhood. Carla followed at a distance, her heart racing with the thrill of finally solving the puzzle. She watched as he left bags at 3 different houses, placing them carefully and silently before disappearing back toward the garden. With every stop, he pulled a small black book from his back pocket and wrote himself a note. Carla took a deep breath and approached the fence. "Excuse me," she called softly, not wanting to startle him. Mr. Otis looked up, his dark eyes sharp despite his age. He straightened slowly, studying her with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "You're the one who's been leaving vegetables," Carla said, making it a statement rather than a question. He nodded once, his expression unreadable. "You look like you could use it, that's all." The simplicity of his answer took her breath away. In a world where people expected recognition for every good deed, here was a man who fed strangers and asked for nothing in return. "I'm Carla Martins," she said, extending her hand through the fence. "I live on Pine Street." "Harold Otis," he replied, his handshake firm despite his age. "Most folks call me Mr. Otis." Mr. Otis, I can't keep taking your vegetables without giving you something in return. Please, let me pay you, or help you, or—" "No payment needed," he interrupted, but his tone wasn't harsh. "The garden grows more than I can eat. Makes sense to share." Carla looked around at the incredible abundance surrounding them. "Did you do all this yourself?" Pride flickered in his eyes. "Took some time. 15 years, give or take. Used to be nothing but trash and weeds." "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. The garden was more than beautiful, it was a testament to patience, dedication, and the kind of hope that refused to give up even when the world seemed determined to disappoint. "Yes," he said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, "if I can keep the birds off." That Saturday, Carla returned to the garden with Sophia and a thermos of coffee. She found Mr. Otis pulling weeds from around the tomato plants, his movements deliberate and meditative. "Thought you might like some coffee," she said, offering him the thermos. He accepted it gratefully, and they sat together on an old wooden bench that overlooked the garden. Sophia ran between the rows, marveling at the vegetables and asking endless questions that Mr. Otis answered with surprising patience. "How do you know what to plant when?" Carla asked, watching her daughter's delight. "Learn from my mama," he said, his voice taking on a softer tone. "She had the greenest thumb in Alabama. Could grow anything, anywhere. Used to say the earth wants to give us what we need, we just have to know how to ask." "Is that where you're from, Alabama?" He nodded. "Born and raised. Served most of my life first overseas, then stateside. When I finally hung up my uniform 15 years ago, I didn't know what to do with myself. Didn't want to sit still. So I found this little patch of land and started digging. Been here ever since." He paused, sipping the coffee. "Lost my Ellie 10 years back. Cancer. We never had children of our own. But this garden, it's like having 1,000 children." The quiet in his voice pulled at Carla's chest. She looked around at the rows of kale, tomatoes, and collards. This wasn't just a garden, it was a legacy. His legacy. "Would you mind if we came back next week?" she asked. "Sophia loves it here, and I'd like to learn." Mr. Otis smiled for the first time since she'd met him. Always room for more hands in a garden. Over the following weeks, Carla and Sophia became regular visitors to the garden. Mr. Otis taught them to recognize when tomatoes were perfectly ripe, how to thin carrot seedlings without damaging the survivors, and the ancient art of companion planting, how certain vegetables helped each other grow stronger when planted together, like people. He explained one Saturday morning as they planted basil near the tomatoes. "Everything grows better with the right company." Sophia took to gardening like she had discovered her life's calling. She named the chickens, learned to collect eggs without frightening the hens. For Carla, the garden became a refuge from the stress of her daily life. The physical work of planting, weeding, and harvesting gave her a sense of accomplishment that her office job never provided. More importantly, she found herself learning not just about vegetables, but about resilience, patience, and the quiet satisfaction of creating something beautiful. She wiped sweat from her brow and smiled, really smiled, for what felt like the first time since she caught her ex-husband Jason in bed with their nanny 2 years ago. "You've got good hands," Mr. Otis told her one afternoon as she carefully transplanted seedlings. "Patient hands, that's what the plants need most." As their friendship deepened, Mr. Otis began sharing more of his story. He had served in World War II, stationed in the Pacific, and had seen things that still haunted his dreams. The garden, he explained, was his way of creating life after witnessing so much death. "Every plant is a promise," he said one evening as they watched the sunset from the bench. "A promise that tomorrow will be better than today, that something good can grow from the ground up." He showed them his small toolshed, where he kept not just gardening equipment, but photo albums and memorabilia from his life. Pictures of him and Ellie on their wedding day, his railroad crew, and dozens of photos of the garden's transformation over the years. "Started with one tomato plant," he said, pointing to a faded photo of himself standing beside a small, struggling plant. "Ellie said I was crazy, trying to grow anything in this mess. But I knew the soil was good underneath all that garbage. Just needed someone to believe in it." He held her gaze a moment. searching her face as if deciding whether she knew what he meant. Carla understood the metaphor. She had felt like that neglected lot many times in her life. Overlooked, undervalued, full of potential that no one bothered to see. Word of Mr. Otis's garden began to spread beyond the mysterious vegetable deliveries. Other neighbors started stopping by, drawn by the beauty of the space and the kindness of its keeper. Mrs. Wilson from the corner house began bringing her morning tea to drink by the fence, chatting with Mr. Otis about her struggles with a small herb garden. He gave her tips and offered to transplant her plants to his garden for a while, to nurse their strength. The Rodriguez family started sending their twins to help with the weekend watering, and the children's laughter brought new life to the space. But it was the food that brought people together. Mr. Otis had been quietly feeding his neighborhood for years, leaving bags of produce not just for Carla but for anyone who seemed to need it. He understood from years of service that taking care of each other was just what neighbors did. "How do you know who needs help?" Carla asked one Saturday morning as she watched him pack bags for delivery. "Same way I know when the tomatoes are ready," he replied. "You just pay attention." The idyllic routine was shattered on a Tuesday morning. Carla arrived at the garden to find Mr. Otis at the fence, staring at a piece of paper in his hands. His face was pale, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked every one of his 90 years. "Mr. Otis, what's wrong?" He handed her the paper and official notice from the city. The lot had been designated for development. A strip mall was planned, and the garden had 30 days to be cleared. "They can't do this," Carla said, her voice rising. "This is your garden. You've cared for it for 15 years. Never owned the land," he said quietly. "The city let me use it, but they never promised forever. But look at what you've created. Look at what it means to the neighborhood." Otis walked slowly to the bench and sat down. "I'm 90, Carla. I'm tired. Maybe it's time." The resignation in his voice was more heartbreaking than anger. This man who had spent years growing life and feeding others was ready to surrender. "It's not time," Carla said, her voice firm. "Not yet." That afternoon, a woman in a business suit appeared at the garden gate, clipboard in hand. She introduced herself as Ms. Dorsey from the planning office, wearing the expression of someone used to delivering bad news. "Mr. Otis," she said politely, "I wanted to discuss the development plans in person." "I got your notice," he replied, his hands folded in his lap. "The city appreciates what you've done with the space, but the neighborhood needs economic growth. This development will provide jobs and tax revenue." "And food?" Carla asked. "Will it feed the families who rely on this garden?" Ms. Dorsey looked momentarily caught off guard. "There are grocery stores nearby. Not everyone can afford them," Carla replied. "Mr. Otis feeds real people, for free." "I understand that," Ms. Dorsey said, though her tone made it clear she didn't. "But this is about the greater good, the broader economic benefit." Otis stood slowly. "How many people will this strip mall feed?" "I'm sorry. This garden feeds 43 families," he said simply. "Families who depend on it." "How many will your mall feed?" Ms. Dorsey glanced at her clipboard. "The anchor store will be a chain restaurant. They estimate serving 100 to 300 customers a day." "For a price," Otis said. "I don't charge anything." The conversation ended with a vague promise to look into alternatives, but Carla saw the truth in her eyes. The decision was made. The garden was doomed, and they all knew it. The city's decision weighed heavily on Mr. Otis. He moved slower through the garden now, spending more time on the bench, staring at the rows of plants like someone saying goodbye. Carla tried to lift his spirits, but he only shook his head. "They'll bulldoze it no matter what I say," he murmured. "Maybe it's time." But Carla refused to let go. "This garden feeds people, Mr. Otis. It matters. You matter." He didn't argue, but he didn't disagree either. When they returned the next morning to find a chain-link fence and a bold red sign, "No trespassing, demolition scheduled, November 15th, he didn't say a word, just turned around and walked away. Later that afternoon, Carla found him on his porch, staring into the distance. "They didn't even let me harvest the winter vegetables," he said quietly. "All that food, just going to waste." That night, unable to sleep, Carla began making calls. She reached out to old friends, local organizations, Anyone she thought might help. Most led nowhere until one name came up. Uncle Harold, a surprised voice asked on the other end. Yeah, I know him. He's my grandfather's brother, but we haven't talked in a while. The voice belonged to Jamie Otis, mid-30s, uncertain, guarded. He's in trouble, Carla said, and I think he needs you. Jamie hesitated. I don't know, we didn't part on great terms. Well, Carla replied, maybe this is your chance to make things right. Jamie Otis arrived in Riverside 2 days later. Dusty from travel and carrying a worn duffel bag, Carla met him outside the fenced-off garden, where bulldozers loomed like vultures waiting for permission to pounce. I appreciate you coming, she said. Jamie shrugged, unsure whether to meet her eyes. He probably doesn't want to see me. You might be surprised. They walked in silence for a few moments, the air thick with things unsaid. Finally, Jamie spoke. I wasn't much good the last time I saw him. After my mom passed his niece, I was supposed to look after him. But I was in a bad place, made some dumb decisions, got arrested, spent 6 months inside. Carla glanced at him. He tried to help you. He did. I wasn't ready to accept it. Said some things I shouldn't have. Later, I wrote to him from jail. Tried again when I got out. He never replied. Carla thought of the small box she'd seen in the tool chest, once tied with a faded ribbon. I don't think he threw your letters away. Jamie let the idea sink in. I read about the garden. The paper called it an abandoned lot. That's what made me get in the car. It's not abandoned. He never abandoned anything. They stood at the gate, staring in at the overgrown rows and empty coop. He built all this for other people, Carla said, quietly, for years. I can't let them pave over that. Jamie took a deep breath. Then maybe it's time I stood up for him the way he once tried to stand up for me. That afternoon, they started making calls. They posted flyers, drafted a petition, and knocked on every door they could. For every skeptical look, there were 2 people who remembered bags of vegetables left on their porch, or the time Mr. Otis fixed a neighbor's broken gate without being asked. We don't have lawyers, Jamie said, or lobbyists. No, Carla replied. But we've got neighbors, and stories, and the truth. The work was exhausting, but electric. Carla and Jamie stayed up late drafting emails, printing flyers, and calling anyone who might care. Neighbors, local nonprofits, school boards, urban farming advocates. Most remembered the man who left food without fanfare. Many were ready to fight. Then came the call that changed everything. This is Alex Williams, the reporter said. I've been covering community stories for a decade, and I've never heard one like this. A 90-year-old man feeding an entire neighborhood. That's not just news, that's hope. Alex and his crew met Carla at the garden the morning of the rally. As noon approached, the lot stood empty except for the bulldozers behind the chain-link fence. For a moment, Carla feared no one would come. Then, 5 minutes before 12, Mrs. Wilson appeared with a sign, "Save our garden." Then came the Rodriguez family. Then more parents, teens, elders, people who had received herbs on their doorsteps, eggs they didn't ask for, zucchini they hadn't grown. By noon, nearly 200 people had gathered. Kids held handmade signs and scarecrows shaped like city planners. Sophia waved a drawing of Mr. Otis surrounded by sunflowers and butterflies. Alex's camera rolled. He never asked for anything, said Mrs. Wilson. My kids thought veggies were gifts, not chores, added Carlos Rodriguez. Sophia beamed. He loves the garden. That means it's worth saving. Ms. Dorsey arrived with 2 guards and a folder of city documents. She set up a folding table, cleared her throat, and addressed the crowd through a megaphone. I understand the emotional attachment, she began, but this development will bring jobs, tax revenue, and opportunity. Will it feed families for free? Mrs. Wilson called out. Dorsey faltered. The restaurant will. Will it teach kids to grow food? Carlos interrupted. A murmur of agreement passed through the crowd. This isn't about sentiment, Dorsey pressed. It's about responsible city planning. Carla stepped forward. Mr. Otis has been responsible for years. He's fed families, created a safe space, and asked for nothing. What could be more sustainable than that? Dorsey's tone sharpened. He's 90. When he's gone, this becomes an abandoned lot again. A hush fell until Jamie stepped forward, holding a thick folder. "No, it won't," he said, "because we're going to make sure it continues." He opened the folder and began to read. "I, James Harold Otis, propose the creation of the Harold Otis Community Garden, a non-profit dedicated to preserving the work my great-uncle began 15 years ago." The crowd leaned in. 12 families have committed to daily maintenance. The elementary school has agreed to use the space for environmental education. 3 local businesses have pledged funding for tools, seeds, and repairs. Carla stared, stunned. "When did you do all this?" Jamie gave a quiet smile. "Since I got back, I knew he'd never quit, so I planned for the day he couldn't do it alone." He turned to Dorsey. "The city could lease the land to the non-profit for a nominal fee. In return, we'll grow food for low-income families, teach kids, and care for this place. You may not be able to measure it in tax dollars, but it's worth everything." Alex Williams never stopped filming. The faces, the signs, the stories. Later, during a break, he pulled Carla aside. "This isn't just about zoning," he said. "It's about legacy, redemption. What happens when ordinary people refuse to let something beautiful die?" Carla nodded, heart pounding. He thought no one was watching, but they were. "This leads the evening news," Alex added, "and I'm pitching a full feature. Not just about saving this garden, but how cities can grow better, from the roots up." That night, the internet lit up. Photos and videos from the rally spread like wildfire. Stories poured in. Neighbors who'd found produce on their porch, kids planting carrots in Mr. Otis's soil. The hashtag Save Otis Garden began trending. First locally, then across the country. Donations followed. Letters to the mayor's office. And suddenly, the story no one expected anyone to care about became impossible to ignore. The public outcry caught the city off guard. Faced with growing pressure, the council announced an emergency review of the development plans. Ms. Dorsey, visibly rattled in interviews, admitted that community feedback will play a role in the next steps. She agreed to meet with Jamie and Carla to review the non-profit proposal. In the days that followed, meetings blurred together. To everyone's surprise, Dorsey was cooperative, likely swayed by the headlines. The developer, eager to salvage its reputation, offered to relocate the project. Jamie, more poised than anyone expected, navigated the bureaucracy like a seasoned advocate. Local lawyers volunteered their services, and within weeks, the paperwork was finalized. The deal exceeded their hopes, a 99-year lease for $1 a year. In exchange, the garden would remain community-run, open to the public, and supported by the city with water and utilities. The developer, still licking its PR wounds, even pledged materials to help rebuild. By the time spring rolled around, the community garden was in full swing. New fencing framed rows of fresh soil, and a brand new greenhouse gleamed in the morning sun. Children laughed as they planted seedlings. Neighbors worked shoulder to shoulder. Mr. Otis stood at the edge of his lot, taking a moment to reflect on his years of silent labor that now brought joy to so many. "Mr. Otis," Sophia called, racing toward him. "We planted snow peas, and the Rodriguez boys are building a new chicken coop." He smiled, misty-eyed. "It's beautiful," he whispered, "more than I ever imagined." Jamie stood beside him, shovel in hand. "We saved your bench," he said, "and we're planting a tree not because you're gone, but because you're here to watch it grow." In the months that followed, the Harold Otis Community Garden became a model for urban farming. Carla left her insurance job to serve as its full-time coordinator. Mr. Otis, though moving slower, remained its heart. Gardeners young and old sought his quiet wisdom. "Listen to the plants," he'd say. "They'll tell you what they need." The garden attracted national attention. Urban planners, teachers, and environmentalists came to study its design and community impact. In a surprising twist, the same developer that once tried to erase it approached Jamie with a new offer to help build more gardens just like it. "We realized," their rep said, "some value can't be measured in dollars." 3 new community gardens took root within a year each, one inspired by Mr. Otis's legacy. One morning, the whole neighborhood had gathered near the entrance, where a large cloth-draped shape stood in the soil. Beside the garden path, Mr. Otis sat on his favorite bench, now restored, freshly oiled, and backed by a row of sunflowers. Carla stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder. Jamie stood on an overturned crate beside the covered sculpture. For a long time, Jamie began, this garden was a secret gift. No headlines, no hashtags, just quiet, stubborn love for the land and for the people who needed it. He glanced down at Mr. Otis, whose eyes were already glistening. I used to think legacy was about money or fame, but my great-uncle taught me it's about showing up every day, giving what you can, and trusting something good will grow. This garden is that legacy, and now it will always have a keeper. Jamie nodded toward a pair of children holding the ropes. They pulled, the cloth fell away, gasps rippled through the crowd. The statue captured Mr. Otis in bronze, slightly stooped, trowel in hand, a wire basket of vegetables resting at his feet. His expression was calm, focused, watchful. Behind him, a weathered garden hat just like the one he wore every day had been sculpted onto his head. Everyone turned to see Mr. Otis. He stared, stunned, speechless. Then one of the Rodriguez twins tiptoed over, plucked the real hat from Otis's head with a grin, and placed it gently atop the statue. The crowd laughed. Mr. Otis just shook his head, eyes wet with gratitude. I never was that handsome, he managed. That afternoon, children ran past the statue, giving it high fives and pats on the elbow as they carried watering cans and compost buckets. A few volunteers planted wildflowers around the base, and when Sophia asked why the statue was built in the middle of the rows, Carla answered without hesitation, "So he can keep watch." 3 years later, the original garden still bloomed, but it no longer stood alone. Across Riverside and beyond, other lots had transformed. Some sprouted in schoolyards, others filled vacant corners between apartment buildings. Each had its own flavor, but they all shared the same roots. Jamie now ran a city-wide network of community gardens. Carla served as its coordinator, her clipboard always tucked into the pocket of her dirt-streaked overalls. They trained volunteers, mentored youth, and taught classes in seed saving, soil health, and quiet leadership. At the original garden, Mr. Otis's bench remained under the sycamore tree, now shaded by the leaves of the very sapling Jamie had planted years earlier. It had been a year since he passed, aged 93. He slipped away peacefully at home, surrounded by members of his gardening community that he considered family. A small plaque had been fixed to the slats. It read, "Listen to the plants. They'll tell you what they need. H. Otis." Visitors still touched the bronze statue for luck. Kids still dropped sunflowers behind its ear. No one ever called it a scarecrow. They called it Mr. Otis. The garden produced more food than ever, but its roots ran deeper than the rows of lettuce and tomatoes. Because Harold Otis hadn't just planted crops, he had planted hope. And hope, it turned out, was wildly contagious.